numbers off the top of my head, but it's spread, as you all know, like wildfire, and it's very interesting from my point of view, because when the Obama administration originally proposed this, they very deliberately set out to make this a grassroots undertaking. They had their own legislation. I'll talk about that in just a minute. They certainly wanted the federal government to be active in this way, but and maybe some of you here or people that you work with were involved in this, is that they brought in, I think it was 6 or 7 convenings that they had in the White House, in the old executive office building. They brought in state groups and regional groups expressly with the motivation of trying to build coalitions to support promise-type programs. It wasn't just higher education too. They brought in business, and they brought in some of the philanthropic groups as well who've been interested in this concept. So the Obama administration really lit the match as far as I'm concerned in this. And of course, it's as I say, it's taken off. In terms of what's going on in Washington, there is still a good support for free community college. There is also a lot of talk about, debt-free college generally and free public college generally. There are also people who are saying, no, that we can't afford that right now. That's going a little bit, faster than we ought to be doing. So we ought to be looking at more modest types of approaches. One of those more modest approaches is what they're calling a federal-state partnership, where basically the federal government would put some money on the table to the states, and the states in turn would make a commitment to providing a certain level of public support for institutions, whether that's in the form of a certain tuition level, as in free community college, or a certain given level of tuition, or just maintaining and increasing the amount of state investment that there's been, that they're providing, because as you all know, we've seen, let me think about the, state funding has just continued to drop, and students have borne the brunt of the withdrawal. I mean, tuitions have gone up. Community college tuitions have still been relatively moderate, but four-year public institutions have been, skyrocketed, not the past couple of years. And so basically the states have pulled out, students have paid more, the government's picked up a lot of that tab in the form of student aid. So that's very, very much on the mind of members of Congress, and something that I think we're going to see debated in this Congress. How exactly it shakes out, I have no idea. But one thing that's very clear is that the number of Democratic presidential candidates in the Senate, they're all, not all, but certainly a number of them already have staked out positions on this, and you can be sure that there's going to be a robust debate in the U.S. Senate if higher education legislation moves forward on this concept of what the federal government should be doing in a new and different way to try to interact more broadly with states and with institutions in terms of how they support students.
You mentioned when we opened up about some of your time being spent on the Higher Education Reauthorization Act. And so could you talk to us a little bit about maybe the 2 or 3 things that we certainly should be informed about with regard to potential changes, an advocacy position that would be of benefit to our students, et cetera. And so once again, if we were to take back a few nuggets with regard to AACC's position on what we're advocating, specifically with HEA.
Yeah, well, it's the HEA is massive. The HEA includes all the student financial aid programs, TRIO, Gear Up, institutional aid programs, historically black colleges, universities, Hispanic serving institutions. So it's the overarching law that creates all these essential programs on our campuses. And that's what Congress is in the process of reviewing and possibly changing. If they don't do this as they have in previous years, the current law stays in place. One thing to know about that, though, and maybe some of you are feeling this on your campuses, is that the laws and the regulations are increasingly getting out of step with what the needs of the institutions actually are in various ways. And so we emphasize to members of Congress and their staff, please, try to make nice with each other, would you, boys and girls, try to get a bill done. Because the last time the bill was done was 2008. We're now 11 years past that, and we're not sure we're going to get a bill this Congress. So in terms of issues, just a couple things. One of the things that we're working on really diligently is getting some support for short-term programs, through the Pell Grant program, major priority. Secondly, and there's a lot of support for that. Secondly, I would say what they call second chance Pell, but it's Pell Grants for incarcerated individuals It's amazing to me that there is a growing amount of support for that from both sides of the aisle to do that, and it's something that, I mean, I personally feel very strongly about. A lot of us do for various reasons. My reason in part is because I was around when they took it away. I mean, I've been doing this long enough that they, you know, I was working in this for the community colleges even when students in prison were able to use Pell Grants for educational programs, and when that was ended in 1994, the number of students enrolled in higher education were incarcerated dropped dramatically. You all know there's a lot of programs out there, right, that are doing it. There's, you know, states are doing it, and there's some private money doing it. I mean, it's happening, but it's not happening anywhere near as much as it should be. So we had this taken away, and it was such a non-starter for so long. Again, just to repeat, it is incredible to me, in truth, that people have sort of woken up to what an obvious right thing this is to do, how helpful it is. Any argument you want to use, you know, moral, whatever, you know, economic, you know, there are all sorts of arguments you can use, and people are kind of getting it. So I'm really optimistic, and you know, by the way, I know everybody has their feelings about, you know, just to give you one example here, you know, the president. You might like him, you might not like him, but you know, just to give credit where credit is due, you know, the Trump administration is supporting this. You know, they haven't given the details on it, but you know, when you've got a pretty darn conservative administration that is behind this, then you know that says something about the political acceptability of the idea. The last thing on reauthorization is and this is something bad that we're trying to stop from happening, is this concept of risk sharing, and that is assessing some kind of a financial penalty on colleges if they have high default rates or their students aren't repaying their loans. The Prosper Act, which was the bill that was passed by the Republicans in the last Congress, would have basically charged institutions for students who don't complete their terms. So it was a real negative for community colleges. So that may reassert itself or reemerge in different ways. But we don't think it'll be in the way the Prosper Act was, but this concept of institutions having skin in the game has a lot of, you know, political appeal, and we may well be working on it. And I won't go into all the arguments that we have against it, but we think it's just a horrible idea. It's really punishing the institutions that are serving, you know, the hardest to serve students, and why you would want to take money away from a college that already doesn't have enough money because students don't repay their loans. And of course, I'm going to start making arguments now, but the students have left the colleges don't collect on the loans, they don't determine who gets the loans are about providing access. Not everybody is necessarily going to be successful, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth doing. So there are a lot of arguments against it, but you know, people glom on to bad ideas and stick to them, and this is one that a lot of people think is a good idea.
And this is my last question for Mr. Baime, so that's your prompt to get your questions ready, right? And so, you know, we've got 60, 70 folks that are in the room today, all varying levels of understanding of kind of legislative advocacy and things like that, but a great need for them to be informed about what's going on at the federal level and then drilling down to the state level. What advice would you give to the folks here about how they can grow and deepen their understanding of kind of positions on current legislative items coming down the pike and things like that? And then also, how can they tap into AACC to stay informed and to kind of be able to manage all the information that's out there as it relates, so that they can be more supportive to the students on their campus? So that's a soft, underhand for you.
Okay. All right. Curveball. So yeah. Well, thanks, Duncan. And I mean, there are a number of things to do, and something that Dr. Bumpus said a couple of times just a moment ago. It's true. I mean, I think Inside Higher Education and the Chronicle do a very good job, if you can devote that amount of time to covering legislative developments, as does our CC Daily. And so, if you can carve out a little time in your morning to do that, I think that that's a very effective means of keeping abreast of things. We also provide a tremendous amount of information on our website. We also have what we call we have a list basically of government people interested in government relations that we push out additional information to. We don't, you were asking the question, Duncan, I was thinking that we don't we don't sort of advertise that as much as we might. So any of you who would like to be on that list, please give me your cards afterwards, and we'll add your name to that list. Of course, I mentioned the event that we're doing in early June. The last thing I'll say, I know many of you are CEOs, some of you are not CEOs, but don't underestimate the value that you have to congressional offices in providing views about what's going on your campus. You know, I'm always struck by how much in the dark a lot of the staff people, the members of Congress are, and they care, you know, they care, and they want to know what the impact is of these various federal programs. And so you can provide them with information. It's always good to have students involved if that's possible. It's not always possible. But, you know, bring members to your campuses, let them know what you think about these various federal programs, let them know what the challenges are. You know, they're busy, they may not necessarily always listen to you really carefully, but they're kind of cut off from things in Washington, and you know, they're in business to help people. And I think that when you provide them with however you feel it's best, the way that works best for you, and let them know Pell Grant's not just a number, it's you help somebody graduate or go to college you wouldn't have, or what you did with a TRIO grant, or you know, a good work study experience, whatever it might be. They tend to care about that, and then when you do that, then they start to value, to trust you, you know, and listen to you on policy matters. So then when you, it's better to tell them what a Pell Grant does on your campus, or the program does on your campus, before you ask them to give you more Pell Grant money. I mean, nothing complicated about that. It's just basic, you know, human relations. So that, I encourage you all to do that. We do have information on our website with just some tips and sort of how to write letters to Congress, and just stay in touch with your congressional delegations.
All right. With that, we'll open it up for questions from the audience. I think we had somebody help with a microphone.
Hi, how you doing? I just, I think I missed something. You said the Prospect Act was approved?
It was approved in committee and it was in the last Congress. So that, and when a bill is not enacted, when the Congress ends, as the last Congress ended at the end of last year, in 2018, the bills dissolve, the bills go away. So no, it was it was just a bad nightmare. Yeah. Also,
Good morning.
Do you mind? No, can you identify yourself just for my
Sure.
benefit,
Good
please?
morning,
Thank you.
everyone. My name is Pamela Brown, and I'm a first-year student in the Morgan State University CCLDP program, but also by profession a behavioral health scientist for the United States Department of Health and Human Services. So advocacy is extremely important to me, and particularly in higher education. My concern is when you mention community college free tuition, and particularly talking about my state, the state of Maryland, and Governor Larry Hogan, who repeatedly used that concept in his recent campaign, who is also deliberating going after the candidacy of presidency. That announcement will be made soon. My concern is, though, even though he utilized that and spoke heavily about that, where do people of color, because of advocacy and awareness, when I talk to many of my students and colleagues, they're still left out as far as what does that mean to them, and as well, the stipulations, as I think that you were alluding to earlier. But how does that, because to me it still excludes a lot of people. So any suggestions on how we can be better equipped with the advocacy role, as well as keeping that on Governor Hogan's radar and his commitment?
Yeah, well, it's an important question because not all free college programs and promised college programs are created alike. And many of these programs, you know, most prominently the program in Tennessee, which was the first big statewide program, is what they call a last dollar program. So the programs, and this is more common than not, the programs are structured so that the student's tuition is paid for, maybe a little bit of books, but usually not even that, tuition and fees. But the student has to apply for and and count against any eligibility any federal student financial aid or other need-based aid in some cases that they receive. It might be a state grant. So let's just take, I don't know off the top of my head what the Maryland tuitions are, but basically, one of the successes, by the way, I'll just quickly interject, is it's not nearly enough, but we have gotten the Pell Grant up to $6,195. I know it's not nearly enough to meet all the students' costs by a lot, but the grant has grown, and it gets you some of the way, towards paying for college. But because of that, because the grant is $600,195, if you're a zero EFC, if you qualify for the full maximum grant, in most states you qualify for zero promise funds, because it would say that we're going to count all your Pell money against the tuition. Again, I don't know what the Maryland tuition is, but I know it's less than $6,200. And so then the needy student of whatever background, but the neediest students qualify for zero. And so, that's a big deal. Now, that doesn't mean that these promise programs are bad programs, but it means that they are not panaceas for lots of students, because people will argue that the student who's a zero AFC, who's a really needy student, needs money more from the state than the student who doesn't qualify for a Pell Grant at all. And I mean, you could say that the child, Bill Gates' child, who might, qualify for some sort of subsidy this way. So, so we, without maybe going further into this kind of policy discussion, I just encourage you, and we're happy to help. We have some resources on our website to make sure that, the needs of the neediest students are in fact being addressed by this. The simplest way to do it is just to say, these programs should be about living expenses as well as tuition. Living expenses are greater for most of our students than they are for the tuition expenses. They're very real, and the whole issue of housing insecurity and food insecurity is something awareness about that's grown in a really good way in recent years. But to say, last thing I'll say about this is in Oregon they actually managed to get some money just for just a couple $100, but the principle mattered, to get money just for non-tuition expenses for students under this Promise program. So that needs to be kept in mind. And then finally, the thing is that, just by way of history, the Obama proposal for Promise was actually zero community college tuition for all students. I mean, that was the great thing about it. It wasn't, I'm sorry, I think I called it first dollar. It was these programs are last dollar, not first dollar. Obama's program is first dollar. So you basically would pay no tuition, and if you got a Pell Grant, you'd get all your Pell Grant and any other assistance that you qualified for.
Hi, I'm Devin Brown. I'm a first-year student in the Community College Leadership Doctoral Program, and I come from Anne Arundel Community College. And my question is sort of related to the whole concept of free community college. Well, and I support it, but what happens to our institution's ability to raise funding? If that revenue stream is now gone? Because I know here in Maryland, it's about 40, supposed to be like, what, a third funded from the state, a third funded from the local county, and a third from tuition. So what happens to that revenue stream if community colleges are free to the students?
Well, the money comes from somewhere, and so maybe two things about that. First of all, one of the arguments that's used against free community college is that, well, there's nothing really that's free. Okay, that's true, but higher education is subsidized deeply across the board. So to make it sound like the concept of providing free community college and subsidizing the tuition is novel is just baloney, and more people say it, and it really bothers me because it's such a half truth, it's really not the whole story. So that is something that you need to keep in mind. But on the other hand, I think, and we're strong supporters of America's College Promise programs. Part of the reason why is because the evidence shows that when you actually just say community college is free or whatever, you actually draw more students into the system. So it's an access program beyond just the financial aspect of of the program. On the other hand, you know, there are trade-offs, and some people, you know, call attention to the fact that, you know, I was just using sort of facetious example of the Bill Gates's child, but there's an element of truth in that you're giving, if you got a fixed pot of money, if you're giving money to more affluent students, then, you know, you might not be giving money to less affluent students who need the money more. And so, you know, you shouldn't be naive about it. You know, you can say that there's all sorts of good reasons for doing free college programs. Again, we support it. But I think to not be aware that there's a fixed amount of money, that there can be trade-offs, that you need to consider all these variables. You know, you might as well do that. And that's why I answered the last question the way that I did. That, you know, again, if you're going to do a promise program, try to make sure as best you can that it's a program that really benefits people who need it. And just to kind of one other thing on promise, I don't know off the top of my head if there's anybody from there have to be some people from New York here, maybe not. But at any rate, like Andy Cuomo, like that Excelsior, Empire State, program, Excelsior Scholarship. He got like so much good publicity. Well, there's Mary. So much good. Okay, hello. So much good publicity for like never has somebody gotten more credit for providing so little money and so little help to students. Yeah, it helps them somewhat. You know, there's no denying that. But it was like somebody called it right when it was proposed, like TAP, Tuition Assistance Program for the middle class. You know, it's just a little smidgen of money. So you got to keep your eye on, you know, the details of the programs is the short of it.
The tragedy of that Excelsior program is the fact that students are required to go 15 hours per semester, first and second semester, and when in fact they do not meet the full criteria of receiving that award turns into a loan. And the tragedy of that program is it is in fact handicapping students that otherwise would have been rightfully benefited. So I think the real key is to read the fine print. And the difficulty is most of our students are not able to successfully complete 15 credits per semester, when in fact 12 credits, and you know, that's the old devil in the details, is what makes a student full-time for financial aid purposes. But when somebody comes along and says, no, I want you to take 15, 30 per semester, you actually have the summer to make up that full term. But when that doesn't happen and you end up getting, that intrusion of the law of unintended consequences is one of the really bad things that happen to people who are not fully aware.
Got time for maybe one or two more questions?